2026, 45% of organizations worldwide will have experienced software supply chain attacks. This is up from less than 10% in 2021. My name is Paul Nashawaty. I'm the practice lead for the AppDev practice at the Cube Research, and I'm joined by Dan from Chainguard. Dan, how you doing today?
Great. Always love talking to folks from the Cube. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, great to have you again. Why don't you introduce yourself to the audience and a little bit about Chainguard?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Dan Lorenc. I'm the co-founder and CEO here at Chainguard. We're about 4 years old now. Before that, I spent about 10 years at Google working on open source, developer tools, all through Google's cloud platform. Here at Chainguard, we're doing a lot more in security for open source, trying to make it safe for enterprises to build and use open source in all the products and all the ways that they need to.
Yeah, very cool tech. I'm always impressed with Chainguard and what you're doing there. It's you've been really incredibly, powerful in the market. When we look at supply chain attacks, as we kind of led this discussion, it's one of the fastest growing threats in cybersecurity, right? Instead of breaking directly into systems, attackers are basically targeting, trusted software, third-party tools, and open source code, right? And I started with the 45% of organizations are faced with supply chain attack by 2026. This is compared to less than 10% in 2021. That's a big jump, right? And when we look at that, but the shift shows how one weak link in the supply chains can really impact thousands of businesses all at once. And, the effects are costly, they're wide-reaching, causing downtime, financial loss, damages to reputation, et cetera, right? So incidents like SolarWinds and Log4J really revealed how dependent modern applications are on outside code, creating big risks. So to protect themselves, companies really are looking at stronger security, trusted code verification, and clear visibility through the SBOM, or software bill of materials. So, Dan, when we're looking at supply chain security, it's really a business critical priority in a lot of organizations now, as it should be. Yeah. But let's start with, talking about Chainguard a little bit, because I think after the SolarWinds incidents and what occurred there, launching Chainguard could have helped with understanding the security software supply chain fragility and how securing open source really requires more than scanning. It really demands that integrity, reproducibility, and proactive defense. What else do you have to kind of talk about, why Chainguard was really for?
Yeah, it's such a messy space. You kind of covered, probably 2/3 of it in just, that depiction there of all the different problems that kind of get rolled up into one. At its core, software supply chain security is about knowing what's in the software that you're building and deploying to your customers. No one is writing software in a vacuum today. You mentioned that 46% stat of organizations that are facing a breach. That's because 100% of organizations are building and reusing, building on top of code that they're reusing from other people, whether it's open source or not. The open source stats are baffling too. It's 90 to 98%, depending on which survey you look at, of the lines of code in a modern application are open source. That's great in so many ways. Open source is free, it's public, anyone on the internet can contribute, anyone on the internet can read it. Open source by all stats is far more secure than any other way of building source software because of that visibility you get. But at the same time, it poses a whole set of new challenges that are now coming to light because attackers and because bad people have started to take advantage of it. It's a testament to the goodness of society in so many ways that open source has gotten so far. When you explain it to people that don't quite understand how it works, open source is amazing because anyone on the internet can write it. We're deploying and running code written by strangers on the internet. If you spent any time on the internet, you realize how terrifying that is. It's bad for a bunch of reasons, and that's what enterprises are kind of grappling with today. On the one hand, it's you get no enterprise guarantees for this software. If you go sign a contract with somebody to buy software from them, they promise that they're going to update it. They promise that they're going to fix it. When you take amazing code from volunteers on the internet, they're not making any of those promises. Sometimes they're busy, sometimes they're tired. You're not paying them. You have no right to ask them to do security fixes or to fix your features or bugs. When that pyramid gets so large and you're depending on thousands and thousands of projects written by tens of thousands of maintainers, there's always going to be something in there that's unmaintained, and that pyramid kind of starts to crumble from the bottom.
Yeah, Dan, I really like that statement that you made, which is deploying code by strangers is kind of terrifying. Right? It really is it's a powerful statement if you think about it. We're repurposing open source code and really having to clearly understand and articulate what's in that code in order for our businesses to succeed, right? And not just that, but I mean, there's executive orders, right, that are in place about what's in an SBOM, what's published, what's not published. There's new rules like the EU's CRA as another example. Like that's something that we have to kind of take into consideration as we start moving into 2026 and 2027, where code has to be aligned with certain expectations for governance, compliance, and regulations. It all needs to align to what we're solving. But we also have the challenge, Dan, that we're seeing, which is in our research, we see that organizations are really looking to push code out faster, right? And one of the things that always impressed me about the way Chainguard delivered, I mean, you built a $3.5 billion business, right, by solving the core pain points of security without slowing developers. That's huge, right? Because the CI/CD pipeline, what I'm finding in my research is 24% of organizations want to release code on an hourly basis, yet only 8% are able to do so. So you're really balancing the security with the developer experience and driving that expectation or adoption beyond the CISOs to the engineering teams. Is that correct?
Yeah, our users at the end of the day are engineers. They're just trying to write their code. They're trying to go fast. They're under tight deadlines. No one wants to ship insecure code. It's just to do this the right way is very, very, very hard. Getting open source packages the way they're built. Package managers are insecure. You can't trust that the packages you're getting are even tied to the source code that you might have reviewed if you did review that, which no one does. It's the supply chain is kind of held together by duct tape and rubber bands and paper clips and chewing gum. And that's what you're trying to build secure code on top of. Nobody has time to go and fix all of the open source code that they're using or even to verify it. And that's the step we're trying to do for developers, to let them just focus on building their code, give them whatever they need, whatever version, and don't have to worry about what's inside of it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that your background and the bench strength of Chainguard, coming from projects, open source projects like Kubernetes, right, in the past, or SigStore in the past, right? Those are areas that you have experience and knowledge about how to do these things. Because like you said, not everything can be done, perfectly, but you have to do risk mitigation, right? You have to understand what is it that you're trying to release. I mean, what I found in my trending research in 2022, I did a survey and I found that continuous integrated testing, only 29% of the respondents indicated that they were doing continuous integrated testing as part of their CI/CD pipeline. That is surprising. In 2024, that number jumped to 66%. But like the reason was because DevOps teams are tasked with pushing the big green button, getting code out the door, right? Push out the door. And you have security teams and QA teams basically raising their hair and go, wait a minute, we got a problem. But their DevOps teams like, where our business KPIs get the code out the door. So it was a mix. I think a lot of businesses are starting to kind of come together and understand business KPIs across the entire CI/CD pipeline holistically and across the SDLC, and not just on push code out the door because. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think the whole shift left buzzword, over the last couple of years, especially when you look at it from a security mindset, is really a catch up left, because security teams kind of got left behind in the push to public cloud and infrastructure as code. In the old days, I put that in quotes because a lot of organizations are still operating in this method. Security teams are gate. They're the ones that are deploying the actual infrastructure, managing it, installing agents, ticketing systems to add new packages to these servers. That's how code used to be written. Developers just wrote the little piece of code on top and other teams handled the rest. Infrastructure as code, containers, public cloud, moved all of that stuff into the hands of developers. And that's why it blew up so quickly. So adoption went crazy. Developers now didn't have to go ask 7 teams for permission to deploy code or to set up servers or to scale systems. That gave them all of this power. With that power comes responsibility. And security teams were just kind of left waiting to be asked things, and they never got to ask them anymore because developers just called the APIs and got the infrastructure they needed. So it's kind of been this wake-up moment. And security teams are running left now to get into development teams. They're embedded now. They're working directly with developers as code is written, which is a better outcome for everyone. It's faster, quicker iteration loops. Nobody wants to be the one saying, no, you can't press that green button the day before launch 6 months into a project. But it is this massive catch-up that the whole industry is trying to play right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and this is just going to continue to get faster and faster when it comes to delivering code. We'll have to, I know we're about 9 minutes in, and I'm just going to bring up the fact about AI now, it's just kind of funny. I didn't bring that up.
AI or SBOMs first. Yeah, the two hot topics.
Right, exactly. But like what I'm seeing is because of the introduction of AI being mainstreamed into organizations, we're seeing that the development of applications is exploding, right? We're seeing that application is not just from the professional developer, but it's happening at the lines of businesses, right? It's happening at the citizen developer side, right? Which means that governance, control, and regulations all have to be put in place. So leaders really must act on how to ensure safe, accountable AI adoption. How is Chainguard helping with this?
Yeah, today it's more people writing more code even faster using those same libraries, using that same open source. It's if you remember the no code movement from 4 or 5 years ago, when there were all these builders and there was this vision that anyone was going to be able to slap together internal apps to glue together SaaS tools and stuff like that. That's sort of what we're seeing now, but it's with code. The real no code was actually code just written by people that didn't know how to code all along. And that's what's happening today. There's more and more code that these teams have to grapple with. And we're seeing this kind of phase shift. The existing teams and tooling and automation could handle the amount of code and the amount of commits and the amount of volume being pushed. We have guardrails that could check for vulnerabilities, both in the third-party software and SaaS style scans to make sure your developers aren't introducing vulnerabilities too. That stuff starts to break down when you increase the volume of that code that you're pushing through that system by 3, by 5, by 10x. And without, like you said, people with professional development backgrounds being the ones writing that code. Again, it's great in so many ways that now we're democratizing access to programming. Programming is amazing. The more people that can do it, the better of a world we're going to end up in. But we need those guardrails to catch up too, and be able to handle this increased volume.
Yeah, Dan, I think that's right. I mean, I think that the ability to use natural language to create code and really, it's AI has become an accelerator to do your job faster, right? Productivity gains, right? And do what you need to do. So the days of submitting a help desk ticket and waiting 3 days for resolution, those days are gone, right? I mean, it's really like it's instantaneous now, right? And but I think I want to touch a little bit on the fact that we have all these new regulations that are kind of appearing. Not that it's a surprise, but there's things that are happening. Can you touch a little bit on touch a little bit on like the EU CRA, what's happening here? We see reporting has to be in place by September of 2026. We see all applications, whether it's citizen developers or lines of business or professional development apps, all have to comply by December 2027. How is this going to impact the release cycles?
Yeah, the regulatory landscape is changing rapidly. And I think, there's a couple ways to summarize the big changes that are happening, right? In the US, you've got the Secure Software Development Framework, the SSDF from NIST, which is an amazing, 82-page document explaining all of the best practices to develop software securely. That's the first time we've seen something like this. All of the other regulations typically covered how software is operated and run. This is the first time we're really seeing that shift left of regulations, like we're talking about. The way you develop software is just as important as the way you operate it. That's showing up in things like FedRAMP regulations, CMMC. The government kind of uses, in the US anyway, uses their purchasing power as the largest purchaser of software in the world to force vendors to adopt better practices. And the accelerant for a lot of this is that a lot of these apply transitively. If you check off that you're doing the SSDF, you also have to make sure all of your vendors are too. So even if you're not selling software to the government, if you're selling software to anyone, all of a sudden you're going to have to start worrying about these things very soon. The CRA in Europe is very similar. It actually goes broader in some areas, especially when it comes to open source. Open source developed, there were some nightmare versions of the CRA that got toned down a little bit. A couple of the first versions, we're going to place liability on open source maintainers, whether or not you did business in Europe. If you publish something on the internet, some bank pulls it in, there's a vulnerability, they use it incorrectly, data gets lost, you're now liable just because you published it on the internet. There's no way that could have worked. It was like kind of this doomsday scenario. They softened it a bit, but there's still some kind of ridiculous clauses in there. Now it applies to software developed in conjunction with commercial activity. Who knows how that's going to be actually interpreted when it gets when shit hits the fan here. You have a tip jar on your GitHub. Like, is that commercial activity? Maybe. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it takes it a little bit too far, right? Because I mean, like to your point, I was talking to some organizations and they're like, oh, we used some AI generated code and they pushed out the door and it was broken. Well, it wasn't our fault. The AI broke it. It's like, no, you're accountable. You're responsible for what you put out the door. Same thing here, right? I do think that
that's a really important statement there. Like, you were responsible for what you put out the door, whether you wrote it, whether a model wrote it, or whether an open source maintainer wrote it.
100%. 100%. And, and I do think that some of the restrictions or rules, like executive teams at organizations could face jail time if the CRA is if they break compliance. These are extreme measures now. So it's
it's not just the CRA in Europe. There's a self-attestation form CISA put out. Anyone selling software to the government, the CEO or some other director is supposed to sign this form saying you follow all of these steps. I don't really have a third-party auditing ecosystem in place for all of this yet, so you've got to read it and sign it. I signed one last year. The first line is like, if you lie here, you will go to jail.
Yeah,
read this carefully.
It's very. So, that's one final question here that we're going to wrap up. But so why are SBOMs and signatures not enough? Why are they not enough?
I think, that's the most frustrating part of the software supply chain security space, because none of these things are enough in isolation. It's so many different problems. There's malware getting injected into package managers and repositories. Signatures can kind of help there, and they can't really prevent it, but they can at least help you trace it back and recover faster. SBOMs are just an inventory list of what's inside these things. They got rolled out and pushed heavily after SolarWinds. Nobody thinks that there's going to be a line in that SBOM, if you reviewed it, that said malware injected here. They're really just a way to help you, keep software up to date and know what's inside in the case of a known vulnerability. So there's known vulnerabilities on outdated software. There's malware being pushed into newer versions of software. If you go too fast, you're going to get the malware. If you go too slow, you're going to get Log4j and stuff like this. You have to put all of it together and build a secure supply chain, both for the third-party code you're pulling in and the first-party code you're writing. None of this in isolation is enough.
So Dan, we're wrapping up here. I know we talked a lot on this for a period of time. Any closing thoughts you want to leave the audience with? Where should they go to get started? Wherever they are in their journey, if they're starting or if they're mature in their journey, where should they go?
Yeah, it's the open source piece is scary. Now that attackers are kind of focusing on it, we're rapidly moving to a world where you're not going to be able to keep using open source the same way you have been. The most secure way to run it is to build it all yourself. That's kind of the only way to get all of those trust links out of your supply chain. If you don't do that, then you have no idea what's in it. You can't prevent any of these malware attacks. And unless bad people stop doing bad things, the problem is just going to keep getting worse. That's what we're trying to solve for your Chainguard. We're trying to provide a trusted source for all of that open source that you can just use and depend on. It's kind of like the ultimate guardrail. Just get everything from us and don't worry about any of the other checks later in the pipeline.
Definitely, the devil's in the details for sure. Dan, thank you. Your insights are incredibly valuable. It's always a pleasure talking to you and having you on the show. Thanks for joining me today, and a big thanks to all of you who tuned in. We really appreciate you being part of the AppDevANGLE community. But for now, that wraps up this episode. We'll be back next Wednesday with another conversation diving into the tools, trends, and talent shaping the future of application development. So whether you're deploying at the edge, building an AI, or modernizing your cloud stack, we've got you covered. Be sure to follow us on social. And if you have any thoughts or questions, you can always reach out to me at pauln@siliconangle.com. Until next time, stay curious and stay building. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on.